Hey guys, before the rant starts, this is the season 1 finale of my rant series. Anyways, enjoy. Demolition Doofus. Oh my god, this episode from SpongeBob SquarePants sucks. Here are the reasons why. Mrs. Puff is really unlikable in this episode and completely at her worst, as she is portrayed as a cold-blooded psychopath who straight up tries to murder SpongeBob rather than being the paranoid but patient teacher she has always been. She should be smart and mature enough to acknowledge that seeking revenge and murder isn't the answer. It is also in some ways a blatant rehash of Ball of Revenge, an episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog, even though that episode aired 10 years earlier and that episode was not any better. Mrs. Puff putting SpongeBob into a demolition derby to get him killed feels more like something out of a bad Robot Chicken SpongeBob skit or a really bad SpongeBob parody rather than an actual SpongeBob episode. Unfunny and cruel attempts at humor. Predictable plot where SpongeBob wins each time by doing almost nothing. The infamous scene where Mrs. Puff enters the derby using a large truck and chases SpongeBob in a desperate attempt to kill him. She is also hitting innocent civilians as if she is playing Carmageddon. SpongeBob, at this point, is shown to be driving flawlessly due to what can only be described as a plot contrivance. SpongeBob being entirely mean-spirited by making cruel jokes about Mrs. Puff's critical condition, as well as outright stating that she looks better in said condition, especially when it was his carelessness that caused it. In fact, if it wasn't for his insensitivity towards Mrs. Puff wouldn't have gone full lengths to desperately want to get him killed. Granted, it doesn't excuse Mrs. Puff's behavior, but it doesn't make SpongeBob worth rooting for either, as he pretty much brought this on himself, which in turn makes both characters unlikable. Ridiculous and stupid ending. Mrs. Puff and SpongeBob both crash into the boating school and Mrs. Puff somehow randomly regains her puff. They then get injured by the school, which the tower collapses and crushes them, and the episode ends there. How do you call that an ending? Mrs. Puff doesn't get any comeuppance for her respective unjustified actions, unlike in most other episodes focused around Mrs. Puff's boating school where Mrs. Puff always gets arrested for no discernible reason, even though here, she does not get punished for her heartless deeds. Sure, the boating school collapses on her and SpongeBob, but it's still baffling this of all episodes does not result in Mrs. Puff getting arrested. Mrs. Puff's infamous quote, "Why are you still alive?" This proves that she wants SpongeBob dead. And to think Mrs. Puff wouldn't get any more heartless. The very infamous scene is the rumble, when Mrs. Puff, SpongeBob and the doctor watches the hurting tough guys. How did you call this? This is very violent and most painful scene. Anyways. Screw Demolition Doofus, and screw Choir Boys. Best day ever is so many times better than Demolition Doofus. End of rant.